Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. The time of the mortals is nearly at an end, the demons are well on the way, and to celebrate our imminent demise, our new demonic overlords have gifted us with another little tease into their upcoming rules, and this appears to be what I'm assuming is going to be their main army ability, the one that you get for being a mono faction, and it has similar ties to things like the Cabal points for Thousand Suns if you want an idea of what to expect, although there are obviously a few major differences. But this is the brand new addition to the Demon rules of the Warp Storm points. And yes, gone are the old Warp Storm tables of old, and now instead there is a still arguably a bit too random, but slightly less random than the old 6th and 7th edition Warpstorm tables anyway, but a new way to generate some extra boosts and buffs and powers for your army to make them that much more powerful on the battlefield. And so the way it works is that the warp, as you would expect, still ebbs and flows over the course of the battle, but to represent that now, you can harness that power by rolling, presumably at the start of your battle round, I think, up to 8d6, and then for each 4+ you get on those rolls, you generate 1 warp storm point. So yes, as I said, it is still really random and potentially very spiky for better or for worse, so some people may not like it because of that, but on average this will net you around 4 or 5 points to use over the course of a turn. There are also, as we will see in a bit, some extra ways to generate points, so I think it is fair to say that between, 4 and 6 points is what you can expect to have to hand in each of your turns. I think that's a good base point to assume, but obviously, as always, it can spike really high or really low, so the problem with this ability is that it can leave you really stuck high and dry on a round you really needed those 4 or 5 points, so there is a lot of negative connotations to this ability, but in general I think there is a bit more reliability than the demons have potentially had in the past. But then, during the game, much like stratagems, you can spend these points for various bonuses and powers and effects, and the article does tell us that there are 8 undivided powers and a further 3 for each specific god. So there is potentially a fair bit to play around with, and the ones that they show off range from 2 to 4 points each, so it's pretty much a guess that you will be able to cast maybe 1 big one, or perhaps 2 or 3 of the weaker 2 or 3 point powers each turn. So it is going to be quite important to plan ahead and think how you are going to spend these and, save those points for the right moment, because as far as I understand it, you roll these at the start of the battle round, and then that is your pool until the end of the turn. So you do need to plan ahead after you've made your roll on what exactly you want to be using them for. The article shows off 2 of the undivided powers, Descending Shadow, which is a 3-point power and is used in your enemy's shooting phase, and this basically grants your entire army -1 to be hit by ranged attacks if they are over 12 inches away. So it's kind of like Dense Cover, although it's worth noting this will stack with Dense Cover because it specifically isn't dense cover, so this is a good way to keep your army alive as it's advancing up towards the enemy. And then also they show Malicious Misdirection, which is a bit of a weird one. I've seen a lot of people not quite sure what it does, but what this essentially does is it forces your opponent, when they are dealing with reinforcements, to act as though they are in battle round 2. And this is important because when you get into battle round 3, enemies can deploy reinforcements in your deployment zone, whereas in battle round 2 they can't. So this will limit where your opponent can put down units to steal objectives, or do secure Nuckman data or something like that, or to just try and limit them from getting some nasty charges out of reserves against some of your key units. This is definitely a bit of a niche ability, and it's one that I have seen a lot of people say it's never going to be useful for them, and I can understand that. It is very niche and has a very specific kind of focus, but against some armies that do put lots of little units around to kind of try and steal objectives or whatever, it could help to deter them for a turn, which could be quite useful in some situations. I think the fact that they are essentially army-wide abilities as well, they do affect your entire army, or potentially the entire enemy army, does, in my opinion, make them a really nice bonus to have to, give your forces some extra durability, or to just really hamper your opponent's battle plans if they are an army that has lots of units in reserve. They also very kindly show off one of each of the 4 god-specific powers, which obviously do only affect those god-specific units, but Fury of Khorne grants all of your Legion's demonic Khorne units, so it's worth noting this isn't just core, this does seem to be an army-wide buff, or at least everything with that keyword, which I think is going to be the generic, god-specific Legion keywords, but they all get +1 attack for a fight phase. So this is obviously really, really powerful and really, really good, especially with the new 10-man max squad sizes, I believe. It does mean you are going to be adding a lot of attacks to a lot of separate units, so it is really powerful. It is a hefty investment at 4 points, so realistically it probably is going to be the only power you get off that turn unless you roll really, really well for your warp points. Wave of Sickness for Nurgle is much cheaper at 2 points, and this is used at the start of your shooting phase. You roll a d6 for every enemy unit within 12 inches of your units, and on a 6 they suffer d3 mortal wounds. In my opinion, this one's pretty bad. Relying on 6s is just not a good way to plan a battle or to do reliable damage on an enemy, so personally I would only use this if I have maybe rolled 5 or 6 on my Warp Storm points and I've used a 3 or 4 point ability and I just have 2 points left over and I'm like, I don't really know what to do with these. There's nothing really that I can use them on that will be more beneficial, so why not, I'll just chuck it on and maybe fish for a few mortal wounds before I start shooting into the enemy. Up next we have the Sorceress Winds from Tzeentch, and this is another relatively pricey one at 3 points, but for those points you get an army-wide +1 to your psychic tests, which in an army like Tzeentch, which will presumably have a lot of psychic units, could really be very strong. If you've got a load of pink horror units and HQs slinging spells around, that +1 to cast could very easily be worth those 3 points within the first few casts, let alone across your entire army. And then to round it all off, the Dark Prince has got another massive 4 point power. This gives all of your Legion's Demonica units fight first, essentially. So if you are in some ongoing combat, or you've been charged by a load of enemy units, or your enemy has got a load of Always Strike Last abilities in their army, you can pop this and it essentially will negate a huge amount of damage coming from your opponent before you get to swing. And it's going to mean that even against an army that's made 4 or 5 charges into you, you will essentially just be going in alternating activations like you would in a normal combat, rather than them getting, 4 or 5 units to swing into your army before you even get a turn. So it is arguably a bit niche in some ways, especially for 4 Warp Storm points, but in the right situation, this is very, very powerful and could swing a big turn of combat from a huge defeat into an absolute disaster for your opponent. Finally, in the previews today, we get to see a rule for Epidemious, whose Tally of Pestilence is one of the abilities I mentioned earlier to help you generate a few more points. As you kill enemy models, you keep a tally, and then when it reaches 7, you get an extra point on your next Warp Storm roll. So it's nothing huge, but it's a relatively decent, reasonably easy way to make sure you are at least adding a few extra points to your pool over the course of the game. And I do fully expect every god to have their own version of this ability, whether it's killing units or casting spells or making charges or whatever it may be, just to help smooth out any potential spikes from rolling those 8d6. Overall, I have to say, it seems like quite a fun, fluffy ability for demons. It is very random and very chaosy, so I do understand why a lot of people may dislike it. It can obviously swing massively in your favor or massively against you. It also seems, in my opinion, like it's going to get exponentially better as game sizes go up. 4 points for +1 attack on your units in a 1000-point game is kind of a lot, but it seems to be a very good value buff if you are playing a 2 or even a 3000-point game, for instance. I think in general though, I like this ability. Some of the rules and buffs do seem really quite strong, although I hope personally we get a few more of the 2 or 3 point abilities so that you can at least reliably get 1 or 2 of them off, even if you do have a bad round of rolling. If the majority of them are, 3 or 4 points, it's going to be really hard to get a reliable amount off over the course of the game. And personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing the other 2 Khorne powers so that I can see how I'm going to turn my bloodletters into just unstoppable murder demons. But as always, what do you make of this new rule for Chaos Demons? Is it good, or do you think it's a bit too random? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.